like a lot of you, I see 4 relationships that we have to tend to. Our relationship with ourselves, and that was kind of the last session, it felt like to me. Our relationship with the planet around us, the neighborhood that we live in. If we don't take care of Earth, it can't take care of us. With our neighbors, the other people we share the planet with. And the 4th one, the numinous, the divine, however you want to define that in your own place, in your own spiritual journey. Those 4 relationships we really need to tend to. And I feel like this weekend, I'm seeing you're hitting on all those cylinders anyway, it looks like to me. So I'm really deeply appreciative of that. But that's also your wonder, because so little of this is often being done in our world today, making these kind of connections. Planet, we'll talk about that more this afternoon with the kind of the simple living topic, but wow, we're making a mess of every system. And so if we don't tend that relationship, we're going to be in big trouble, of course, as well as the planet, of course, will be in deeper trouble than it already is. And all these other things too. People just aren't tending them, and we need people who are intentionally tending these things. And so I really appreciate what you're doing. I am David Radcliff with New Community Project. We call ourselves a small nonprofit organization with a big goal to change the world. And from what I can tell, that's part of what's on your agenda too, here at your own organization, but also each of you individually. If my name sounds a little familiar, the Radcliffe part, maybe you've heard of Daniel Radcliffe, the Harry Potter actor. Actually, my son's name is Daniel Radcliffe. We had the name first. My son's older than that little punk. Plus, my son wanted to be an actor. That was that. But you should have seen him in The Music Man. He was Harold Hill. I'm just going to tell you. So my son had to have a plan B. His stage career was sort of, went out the door when the other guy showed up. He had a plan B. Now he's a financial advisor. A lot more money, not nearly as much fun, I just say. I also had a plan B, actually. I had to resort to, or that's not really the right term. I was propelled toward a plan B in my own career. I'd been a theological major in in college, and then I went on to seminary and followed that career track for another 10 years. And then I went to Central America in 1986. And you know what that'll do to you. You all are travelers. You know what I'm talking about here. This was the war years in Central America, if you remember those times there. And, you saw things there that you only heard about in Sunday school. Poverty, refugees, hunger, our country behaving badly. It was a place to shake you up and shake you out. And it really shook me out. And so that led to a career change for me. And I've been doing, this kind of work for the last 35 years. Something like that. And I also realized the power of putting people in different settings to see the world up close and personal in a way that we aren't always privy to. Even when we travel. We're going to talk about that in just a second, actually. There's ways to travel without having this kind of profound impact on oneself or on our world. And so we have to raise some questions then, whether it's worth the carbon and whether it's worth the expense and all those other things. But as you know, we're going to talk about meaningful travel in this session here this afternoon, and this morning, and you know something about that in your organization. So where was I? So back to so the experiential learning part is our methodology. We're putting people in places to see themselves and their world differently, and let them figure out then what that means to them. And I assume that's a little bit what you're hoping for every time you visit someone else's house or someone else visits yours or anybody in your network. You're hoping there's a little shift in worldviews of some kind. Well, that's really what we're looking for. And then how does that affect us? And then how does that ripple out from us to affect others? So, but back to the beginning, I said we're going to change the world. Well, we're trying. You got to pick your battles if you're going to change the world. And so we choose caring for the planet. Again, if we don't take care of the planet, we're in trouble. Then the other thing is we call peace through justice. And that basically means fairness for people. And we focus on women and girls around the world. They're an underutilized segment of the global population when it comes to capacitating and empowering them and getting them into the mix. And then also Native communities in the Americas. We have good relations with the Gwich'in, way up in north of the Arctic Circle in Alaska, the Dene in New Mexico, and Siona and Secopai and some others in the Ecuadorian Amazon. And you will actually meet most of those today in one form or another, one way or another here with my presentation. And then the other thing we do is we also look for the marginalized people in our own communities. The world is not just out there. As you know, it's close at hand. And so we try to think about how can we have sustainable living centers, which I'll tell you about in a moment, or later on actually. Well, in fact, I'll tell you about it right now. The experiential learning part of our work. So we do the peace through justice stuff, and that's the girls, women, Native communities, marginalized. We do the environmental stuff, trying to educate and activate around environmental issues. And then the experiential learning part, we have sustainable living centers in Virginia and Vermont, where they practice what I preach, basically. They're not following my every word to practice it, but they put into action the things we believe as an organization on the ground in their communities. And that's where the marginalized people are connected to our work, and I have some photos about that in a moment. And then we also take people on learning tours, very much like what you do, except it's a little more extended stay in a particular area with a certain purpose. And you'll be on some of those here in a few moments. So all ages are welcome, and we go to places where we have partners in the world, in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, and here in the USA. And then finally, it's my traveling and talking. I probably talk 150 times a year. I mean, COVID was a little different, but, even then I was Zooming a lot, like all of you. And I was in Indiana 3 weeks ago. I spoke 30 times in 8 days. I mean, that includes one grade school where I did 6 presentations. I'm counting that into 30, but 30's 30. I'm just telling you. And so Tuesday I'll be heading for Kansas, where I have a bunch of presentations with all ages there. So a lot of my work is, we feel like you've got to, I don't like to say it quite like this. This is not really the right way to say it, but I'm going to say it. You've got to be in people's faces. And I mean that in a good way. You've got to be connected, and you've got to have the encounter. We're trying to facilitate the encounter, both with my song and dance, where I'm showing pictures and telling stories, or coming to our sustainable living centers where you're seeing the facts on the ground, or going to some other place in the world where things are different. And if you have that kind of encounter, it has the possibility for change, which is my first question for you. The way you're doing things, and the way we're trying to do things with this encounter that you're trying to facilitate, why is that a useful way, and often an effective way, to get people thinking and acting differently? What is it about our methodology, ours together, New Community Project and Servas, what is it about the way that you're doing it that has the potential, as opposed to just giving people information or giving them indoctrination or something else? What is it about the way you do things and the way we do things that gives the possibility for this shift of thinking? What is it about it? What are the characteristics? Tell me something. Yes, in the back.
I think that knowing who you are, if you know who someone is, it becomes part of your own lived experience that's shared. It's easier. It's easy to stand back and
So you focused in on somebody or some group of people, maybe.
They're more likely to trust or believe you if they know who you are.
More likely to trust or believe you if they know who you are. And we can say the same is reciprocally true. But much more likely to know and trust if we know who you are. I like the way you said that, if you know who you are. What else about it? What else about this as a method of change?
Having people come from all over the world, people that you think I'm not going to have any common with these. Some people had 8-year-olds come from Israel, and they're like, what are we going to do with them? It's just the most fantastic thing to happen to us. And we've had maybe 250 Servas visitors. And, for them to cook a meal, for us, and for us to cook a meal for them, to give someone a Snickers bar and they cut it up with a fork and knife. But it's a community that we're not couch surfing. We are learning to love each other's differences.
And you're breaking the expectation of what in the world am I going to do with these people for 2 or 3 days in my house? You find that there's more there than you could have imagined. You have to just trust the relationships, what you're saying.
Right.
And if they cut the Snickers bar up with a fork, you're not going to be snickering. So, what else? What are the other good? Why is this an effective methodology?
You have to hear your voice, because when you have a voice, you add the emotion. When you write it down on Wi-Fi or wherever, it does not reach, because you can click it out, you can get rid of it, you can whatever you call it. But the moment you add the emotion of the voice, it makes a difference.
That's something. And masks haven't helped in all this, because it's hard to read the emotion of the moment. And for you people, I'm sorry, I feel a little bit guilty for standing up here without a mask, but I've had COVID, I think pretty sure in January of 2020, when I came back from Asia. I've also gotten my shot, so I hope I'm safe for everybody and for myself as well. But also, the masks also just they do mask us. And it's harder to read the crowd, harder to read the other person. So I'll be so glad when we get out of this conundrum that we're in now with the mask. But there,
Eyes tell a lot.
eyes do tell a lot, but I like to know if you're laughing at my jokes. So the good thing about masks is I'm pretending you're laughing at all my jokes. Even though I can't really tell, that's going to be my assumption. But yeah, the eyes do tell a lot. You're right. You're certainly right. Yes?
In regards to the mask, a lot of people have hearing problems and you don't know it. And people really do need to see your lips, whether they're
That's a really good point.
lip reader or not.
That's a really good point.
It's just really important. It's a big in-your-face kind of thing, but it's really important. And you don't know if you have a hearing problem until you start putting on that mask.
So she's just mentioning hearing problems that people have and how the masks exacerbate that. I want to go back to what my friend said in the back a moment ago about hearing people's voice. The other thing we find in our travels, and maybe you do too, with yours and people coming to you, is that it gives people a voice. There are people in the world whose voices are not heard, really. If we think about it, we had an example here in the earlier session about the Palestinian refugee. I mean, how many of us know how Palestinian refugees feel? I mean, a lot of you people, there may be people in this group who do, because you're those kind of people, but a lot of people in the world do not know. They're not hearing. The people on the other parts of the world don't have the ability to get their voice heard. And we can be a facilitator of that. So once we hear a voice, we have the opportunity to bend to one. It doesn't have to be someone in extremity, in a Palestinian refugee camp, but even the people who come from different cultures and different colors and different creeds, if you're able to share with your friends, well, this is what that person stayed with me, and let me tell you what they're really like. So you're also giving voice to them, even though they weren't, in extremis, but it helps build a bridge with somebody else in your circle. Anybody else, any other things you can think of that's a powerful thing about the way you're doing things, and we try to do things, yes?
I think there's something about both vulnerability and trust, that when someone is eating with you or sleeping in your home, or you're sleeping in someone else's home, you've opened yourself and you made yourself vulnerable, and that's where we're living on the edge, that's where we can grow, that's where we can learn to love in a new way.
The vulnerability and trust of allowing somebody to be that close to you in your home, in your space, in your place, all those things, that really is important. And for our groups going abroad, we try to trust the people that we're with. And that, when you're traveling through the outback of South Sudan, and there's a war up there someplace going on, you really got to trust the people you're with, and that builds bridges of relationship. In fact, when we travel in places like that, we try to take public transit, or we don't fly from space to space often in a place like South Sudan, which you can get a small charter flight. But the people who you're going to see, they know you came by plane, or they know you took the bus. And that will reflect on you and your feeling about their culture, their place, the challenges they face. So, yeah, all kinds of, the trust thing is really important on a number of levels. What else can you think about? Anything else you think is important, or a niche that we have as doing the kind of work we do that invites change in a way that other systems don't? Yes?
All creeds, all religions, all colors.
Yeah.
I mean, and really deeply, not just like say it, really feel that way. And I think being in Servos for 33 years, we've met every creed, every color, every thought, different beliefs and religions, and with my 8 children have been able to, it makes them totally different kids than anyone else because of what they grew up with.
So having experienced this panoply, is that a word? This panoply of different people and different places, different traditions, it really enriches us and builds these bridges that we wouldn't have built otherwise. And then it spreads, the goodness spreads to other people around us, as you mentioned with your children.
It ripples out, so if you have someone that's 29, my children don't think it's weird to wake up and find someone else in the living room.
Yes.
You mentioned listening.
Yes.
Being a good listener.
Yes. So essential, and how rare in our current politicized climate, in the USA, but also we can say in other places in the world, of course, as well. But the willingness to listen to someone who's coming from a place you're not familiar with, even if not adversarial, someone you're not familiar with, but the listening part, and if you allow yourself to listen, it's risky, because it may change your perceptions about the other person in a way that you weren't prepared to do when they first walked in your door. So the fact that takes down that barrier to seeing them as someone, and to changing within yourself It does give you the vulnerability that you were talking about. Yes.
And knowing the end time of the Service visit liberates you in a sense. You can talk more and you don't have to wonder how is this going to end.
So you've got a final point when this visit's going to be over. On our learning tours, I feel like people can be on their best behavior for about 10 days. And so that's kind of, other than East Africa where we go a little longer, or maybe Nepal a day or two longer, we find that that's a helpful time frame. And so they can buck up and be that way for that length of time anyway. Yes?
I just thought maybe a willingness to be open,
Mm.
and that willingness to just start.
The willingness to be open, the willingness to start. And that's a very powerful place to be, a very powerful place to be. Yes?
I'm sorry to say that I was in Canada, and this man was whirling his spatula, and he said to me, "And why am I telling you all this?" And I hear myself say, "I'm safe." And he goes, "And what do you mean with that?" I said, "Well, I'm not family, and I'm not a friend," and I go away. And we just laughed about it, but it was so true.
That is very powerful. I was visiting in a community of returned refugees in Guatemala about 20 years ago, and these people have been through the ringer. I actually have a few Guatemala pictures for you. This morning. Anyway, so we're staying with this woman. Her name is Maribel, and she had been out of the country, as a refugee in Mexico or someplace, and had finally come back. And I'm there with an accompanier. This was a woman from the U.S. who had gone down to Guatemala to live with these returned communities, so to kind of keep the violence at bay. If you've got an international person in the community, the Guatemalan government's more or less likely to send in the shock troops, because it'll get reported back to USA, and USA gives a lot of support to Guatemala, and there you go. So this woman, Melinda, was staying in the community. She introduced me to Maribel. We're sitting talking with Maribel. She's holding her baby. I almost put a picture of her in today. Boy, I wish I had now. Anyway, we're sitting there talking, and she's telling me. She says, she starts telling me about the domestic abuse she's been experiencing. And her husband drinks. He beats her, he runs around on her. She said, I would have left 1,000 times except for the children. And a side note on that is that's one of the reasons we support girls' education around the world. It gives women other options. As they told me in Honduras one time, in case my daughter gets a bad apple, if she's got an education, she's got an out. She can maybe get a job. But anyway, Maribel was telling this stuff to me, and she couldn't leave because she had no education, no other way to support her children, so she's stuck in that relationship. And Melinda, the woman who was the accompanier who lived in the village, told me afterwards, she's never told me that. I'm making your point. She's never told me that. So it's a liberating presence to be in presence of somebody who's not going to be around forever. Yeah, please.
Hopefully we're breaking stereotypes on both sides.
Breaking stereotypes on both sides. Oh, that's so good. It's so cool. It's not just about us here. It's about, because, I'm often surprised at how well and I'm going to say, I don't know if everyone's, maybe not everybody's in here from the United States. I know there's some international people with some heritage anyway, maybe from residents. But anyway, I'm often surprised at how well people accept us in other places, given how we act in the world often. And so, yes, it breaks down stereotypes on both sides. Yes, please.
It's very important to keep a good relationship after when you have been a host or guest. It's, thanks for social nets now, it's very easy just to remember, send like happy birthday or Christmas or forever.
Yes, it wasn't just a once and done. This is a relationship, really, and we want to find ways to continue in the future. Let me just tell you, to close out this section, let me tell you one little short story that I thought about just a moment ago when Daniel was up here helping me set up, and he said something that's for my memory with this story. But, back in the bad old days of the Cold War, well, every day's a bad old day, kind of, but back in the bad old days of the Cold War, in the 1980s, of course, there was a lot of tension between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. And so, New Call to Peacemaking, some other groups that I've been a part of in my past, and maybe you too, they facilitate exchanges. And they would do reciprocal choir tours. And so a group of singers from one segment of the country where I'm going to tell you about the story of Clyde Weaver. He's the guy that organized this with New Call to Peacemaking. Clyde Weaver, he would send a group of singers over to Moscow, and they were hosted by the Moscow Baptist Church. I think that really is accurate. And then did some singing around the area, hosted by and organized by the Moscow Baptist Church and their choir. Well, then they would come here, of course, and they, you got the Russian Baptists showing up at somebody's church, and there was some flack. I mean, there was some flack back in the early 80s about them coming and protesters outside and this sort of stuff. But then they would, and you all have said this in a number of ways, serve us. It's really serve us. They would host them in their homes. The U.S. people would host as they did reciprocally, I suppose, in Moscow, would host the Russian people in their homes. And Clyde was saying, one morning after they had their host night, they were loading onto the bus to go to the Moscow choir. Moscow Baptist Church choir was loading onto the bus to go somewhere else. And one of the U.S. people who had hosted a man said goodbye to his hostee. I don't know what you call these people. Okay, his guest, as he got on, and he turned away, and Clyde was standing there, and this American guy just began to weep. And Clyde said, what? He said, before these people came here, I imagined Russians with horns.
Absolutely.
That they were people that were despicable, dishonorable, everything in the book, you know. But now I've seen this as a human being just like me.
And that's what serve us is about.
So we're resting your case. I'm resting your case here. This is what you are about. And I'd like to think that's a little bit of what we try to do at New Community Project. So I'm going to, can I do all this thing? I'm not sure we got time. How much, who's got to watch? 11:16. All right, I'm going to do this really quick because I think it's a cute exercise and I've never done it with anybody. But we're going to do this and just see where you come out on this. And I think I can still get finished by noon, which is our time frame. So you see, all right. So you see my signage up here. My writing is not the best, but I'm going to interpret for you. And up the top, you see tourism, mission, which I mean by that mission trips, and us. Serve us in New Community Project. And then, what's the goal of the traveler? What's the impact on the locals? And what's the impact on the visitor, the traveler themselves? So, let's think about tourism first. So you see what I'm doing? I got my categories here. And by the way, tourism is a $1.5 billion industry in the world. Mission, they say about, what do I got the numbers here? 2 million people a year go, pre-COVID, but 2 million people a year go abroad from the United States to do mission projects of one kind or another. Often church-related, not always, or church or religious related, but not always. So that's a lot. And by the way, it used to be, I don't know if this is still the case or not, but it used to be Jamaica was the prime destination. Not that we want to say there's ulterior motives of any kind, but I'm just saying to you. Anyhow, and then there we are over there. So, when you think about tourism, what's the goal of the traveler? When you're going into a place as a tourist, now I'm asking you to be a little bit stereotypical here, okay? I know there's good tourists and bad tourists, but when you think of the stereotypical tourist, what's their goal going to a place? Tell me.
Food.
Food?
Yeah.
Entertainment? The sights.
Sex.
Pizza. Did you say pizza? Oh, no, maybe you didn't.
Sex.
He said sex. Oh, we're just saying. Okay, so what else in the back? A beach, a place to relax, a place to chill. Okay, very fine. All right, how about mission trips? When they go to a place, so you're on a mission trip of some kind, what's your goal in going to the place you're going? So, wait, okay, well, I need one at a time.
To be helpful.
To be helpful? Changing someone? Impact of what kind? Be a little more specific?
Of your being there.
On them. That we will have an impact on them being there. Thank you. What else?
Save their souls.
Save their souls. Who else?
Contact with people, local people.
Contact with local people. Can be. Yes.
Housing or medicine.
Say it again.
Housing or medicine.
Housing. So doing something, helping with a housing construction or medical delegation, something like that. So doing something that's helpful to the community, hopefully. Yes. Say it again, please.
I said you help yourself because by helping others you feel good.
You do feel good. So we can feel good about the thing that we've done there. Thank you. And help ourselves was the word you used. Thank you.
To redeem yourself.
Say it again.
To redeem yourself.
Redeem yourself. And to redeem yourself. And we could use a little of that. So redeeming ourselves. All right. And finally, okay, now you people and us people. When we're entering into these relationships, what's the goal? As thinking of ourselves as a traveler, so to speak.
To learn.
To learn, to relate,
Spread love.
Spread love.
Spread peace.
Spread peace.
Broaden our horizons.
Broaden our horizons.
Learn about their culture.
Break down boundaries. Learn about other cultures.
Enrich the world.
Enrich the world.
Understanding.
Understanding.
Satisfaction.
Say it again.
Satisfaction.
Satisfaction.
Partnering.
Partnering. It's all great.
Guys say sex.
Only if you built the relationship first. Anyway, all right, very good, very good. Now, impact on the locals. So you got the tourists coming through, and you're a local person in that community. What's the impact on the locals? Money can be, and of course, COVID has been tough. You know, I'm not a big tourist promoter, but COVID has been tough. Of course, money often doesn't get down to the local community so much, but COVID, especially on wildlife, which I don't know if I'm going to talk about any other time, but our going to national parks in other countries, that pays for the protection of the rhino and the other things that are living there. So that's been tough. So money is a factor. What else? What impacts of tourism on the locals? Envy certainly can be. What else? Pollution can be, yes. Uses up resources. Man, I've seen enough ecotourism that don't look that eco to me. But yes, of the resources we use in getting there, think about the carbon as well as the financial resources. I'm going to tell you a sad story. I hate to even tell you this story. It's a little embarrassing for me. But my granddaughter, oh gee, I don't know why I'm telling you all this. I guess because we got a relationship, I don't know. I'm telling you, I'm never going to see you again, so I can tell you all these things. My granddaughter had gone to a very conservative Christian school in high school. And it had nothing to do with it. I don't know. It was against so many things that I care about and believe. But it was out of my hands, as these things are when it's your granddaughter. Anyway, at one point, they saved up money to go to Guatemala. Now, I was a bit personally upset that she didn't take her first international trip with me. So there's another issue there, the pride thing and all that other business. But they went to this place in Guatemala, and it cost each of the kids $2,000 or something. She went with the church. She wasn't going with her school, but it was a nearby church that they attended, which had the similar ilk. So they went on a mission trip to Guatemala. $2,000 a kid. I think there were 50 people. What's 50 times 2,000? That's $100,000. They handed out a few meals at a dump. They maybe led a Bible school class. But my granddaughter, bless her heart, when she came home, she said to me, Pop, we didn't really meet the people. And I'm thinking, what could I have done with it? Speaking of the money, what could I have done with $100,000 in girls' education, in women's empowerment? Okay, I don't know why I got off on that, but the benefits and all that stuff. All right, so next we're impact, a mission trip. You got a mission trip coming. We didn't do mission trip, did we? We just did tourism, right? Okay, mission trip. Impact on local people of a mission trip coming in. A mission delegation. Oh, come on.
I think about the Aborigines and the people that were away from religion but had spirit and had love, and now we take and push on them what our thoughts are, and their whole ecosystem.
She's talking about native people, and they have their own system, they have their own relationship to the land, and their own traditions, and we come in and push that stuff aside.
The spirit is not something that's just one word.
Say it again, please.
Not something that is just one word or one thought, to accept all and not go in and try to decimate an entire community. So one of the best moments of my life, honestly, was we were in the Ecuadorian Amazon with Delio, who you'll meet here this afternoon. And he said to me, and we're not a Christian organization, but we kind of sprang out of that radical Jesus tradition, and we don't beat that drum anywhere really, but that's kind of where some of us on the staff come from. And our friends who were hosting us in the Amazon rainforest didn't want us to let the native communities know that we had anything to do with Christianity. You understand what I'm saying? And then at some point, about 6 or 7 years into our relationship, and I don't know, Delio, I guess he knew, I don't know if he knew or what by then, but we were also, as New Community Project, we weren't beating that drum, but we had a little ceremony. And he gave me one of his canoe paddles. And he said, these other people that come here, and he went through a little refrain,
of the things they've done. He said, you come here, you don't tell us how to live, you don't tell us how to dress, you don't tell us how to marry, you don't tell us what to believe. We're actually, he used a Spanish word for enthused. I thought that was a little strong, frankly, knowing us, but enthused that we were going to be with them. So how do we get, but okay, back, so the bad old days you're talking about. Well, other impacts on the locals of mission, yes.
Well, I have a project in Haiti, and people ask me if I go there often. I go there as rarely as possible.
Bless your heart.
Because my local Haitian colleagues are culturally competent, they know the solutions, they don't need me there. I'm a liability. They have to keep me safe, they have to keep me, they have to try to keep me alive so I don't get so sick. I almost died on one trip. I'm a liability. They don't need me. They need resources. They are partners.
Yes.
So we can partner. There's a great book, if anybody's interested in working with the developing world, called Toxic Charity.
Yes.
Highly recommend it.
She's recommending the book Toxic Charity.
What we can offer, living here in the United States, is financial resources, awareness, so that other people can recognize how a small effort on our part can make a huge impact there, and let them do what they do best. They don't need us there. These mission trips.
I need you in our organization is what I'm really needing here.
I'm always up for a new partner. These mission trips, as you just explained, take huge amounts of resources and make little or no impact.
But we got a stamp in our passport.
Yeah.
All right, so you've taken us over here, really. You've really moved us in this direction. Let's go there. I don't think we need to spend more time on mission trips and impacts, but let's talk about this over here. So on the locals, what's the best case scenario if you and I show up or don't? I really like the way you said that. So one option here is we don't show up. We find ways to resource the in-country partners. But let's say we do, or let's say we're engaged there. I'm going to count what you're saying as our being engaged there. You may be not trying to go there, but you are there. Your organization is there. So yes. So what's the impact on the locals of people doing it in a better way? Yes.
Language exchange.
Language exchange? Oh, okay. Yeah, that's interesting. What else, sir?
Mirror images.
What do you mean by mirror images?
I see you and you, and you see you.
I see you and me and you. And that's not going to happen if you're coming in on a tourist flight or on a mission program. I have been, I've been in communities. In fact, the one I'm going to take you to here in a few minutes, if we have time. I've been in communities where the mission group stays in a hotel outside of town someplace. And brings their own lunch in a box. I mean, please. But you're saying mirror images. We're there with each other, seeing each other, experiencing each other on a deeper level in the back.
Like Churchill said, never give up. So they see that there is a change possible and that other people do care.
And that they're with them. Okay, this leads me. I'm just going to have to do this right now. So, all right, how can I do this? All right. You've heard the old adage. Give a person a fish, feed them for the day. Teach them to fish, feed them for a lifetime. Okay? We all know how that works. So there's the fish. And this is the work of charity. Teach them to fish. And that's the work of that's the work of development. That's the work of development. So those are two things. But that doesn't go, as I've been thinking about this over the years, doesn't quite go far enough. Even if there are times when charity is appropriate. I'm going to show you a case in Malawi, if we get there today, where they were down to a meal a day and we left some money for food. Because of climate change. I felt like it was we were causing it, they were suffering from it, we needed to meet the need at the moment. So there's a need for charity occasionally. If a storm blows into Manhattan or wherever storms are blowing into these days, there's a need for charity. There's also, of course, the need for development, training. You can think of all the education, training, all the microloans, all those things. But what good is having a fishing rod and knowing how to fish if the stream is polluted? It did you no good. Now we can expand that not to just a stream, but we can talk to climate change and the mass migration that's going to be is going on currently in the world and will continue to go on. By the way, they say Boko Haram in Nigeria, who abducted those schoolgirls a couple of years ago and still causing havoc in various places, driven off their farms by desiccated crops, these young men. And they're looking for some way to make money and make a name for themselves. And there you go. There's Boko Haram waiting with $20 a month and food and taking over villages and girls. So I'm just saying. So anyway, if you don't have a sustainable environment around you, that's not going to do you any good. And then, even if you've got the stream, but you don't have a place by the stream, give me some things that keep people from exercising the skills they have. What are some factors in society that keep people from moving ahead to do what they are capable of doing? Transportation, that is such a good one. I didn't even think about that. Transportation, well, you got to, I'm going to show you pictures, but yes, if you don't have transportation, you can't do the thing you want to do. What else? What are those things? Say it again. Political corruption that doesn't let you flower in the way you should be able to because of your system. Yes. Being female, a huge inhibitor. 130-some million girls are not in school around the world, often because they're a girl. There's other reasons too, but often because they are a girl. Yes, ma'am.
Food insecurity, lack of access to clean water, and no access to education.
All these things are going to be, you can have the skills, you can have the ability, but you don't have a way to move ahead because you've got intestinal problems or malnutrition problems, which affect your brain as well as your body, and also lack of education. Anything else you can think of that are the glass ceilings is kind of what we're talking about. Yes. Lack of finances, lack of capital. We visited, I'm going to show you this picture. Yes, thank you. Lack of capital to take the next step. Yes, sir.
So you know how to fish, but there's no fishing signs everywhere. It's no trespass.
Oh, private property. He's kind of getting at. But the extraction of communal lands. I'm going to tell you this later, but I'm going to tell you now. You know, my friends in the Amazon have had 99% of their traditional lands taken away. Same with native communities in the continental United States. 99% of their lands taken away. And that's not exactly, that's sort of putting a no pressure. You drive them back into a little corner someplace, which, by the way, this study in the New York Times this week said, these people, where we have driven them because of their nativeness, where we have driven them are more climate vulnerable places than where they were. That because they don't have, for instance, they don't have access to the high ground where they can move upward like the American pika has to do. I'm going to get to my pika story later in the day. Get to higher ground so climate change doesn't do you in. They don't have that access to that land anymore. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We need to move on. All right, so we've already talked about it. So this is, I don't know what you call this, but we're going to call it ecological sustainability. This is justice. So ecological sustainability is a clean stream. Justice is having a place by the stream, absent all these barriers that you all very helpfully mentioned. So 4 things: charity, development, justice, ecological sustainability. And you know, this is as far as I used to go with this analogy. Then a friend of mine who's actually on our board now, Greg from Elizabethtown, Pennsylvania, said, you know, David, all that's great, but I think what people really want is to know they're not alone. That somebody else knows and cares about them and is with them in the battle. And so I'm going to put you people in Servas with your cool t-shirts on with the earth on it, and others of us who are standing by people. And you're not there that much, but they know you're with them. They know you're with them. And it may also mean that we're making changes in our own lives to express our solidarity. We'll talk more about that this afternoon. But, you know, we all still kind of live the lifestyle of the rich and famous, frankly. So how does that connect with our neighbors abroad? It's all I live in a modest little place near Roanoke, Virginia, but I think, would I want to have one of my international visitors, friends, visit me here? Would I be embarrassed at my fairly modest accommodation? But access to clean water, all the food I want, bicycle that I can take out my rides, whatever, transportation, as you mentioned, an issue. So those are the things. All right, finally, all right, so those are the 5 movements that I kind of came up with. All right, then the final thing here, we didn't do our impact on the visitor. So what's the impact on the visitor of a tourist experience?
Change.
Say it again.
Change.
Shame or change?
Change. In their thoughts, their behaviors, what they really know now, what they didn't know before.
All right, so you're saying a tourist who goes to Acapulco is going to change?
No.
That's what I'm getting at.
Their thoughts about the people, the real people in Acapulco, that what they thought of them isn't true.
Okay. If they get outside the hotel grounds, right. Yes. Okay, yes.
Never ever stay in a hotel.
Okay, no, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about the prototypical tourist.
Yeah, I think that when they meet a young girl...
If they do have that opportunity, yes, that can happen. It can bring change if they do have the encounter. What else about the impact on the tourist of being in this place? Yes. Sunburn, yeah, that's our most lasting memory. And I was sitting beside a young woman coming back from Haiti or someplace on a flight. I was coming from Houston back home, and she was coming from Haiti, I think, back to Houston, and then we rode the same plane home from there. Anyway, she said, it just made me realize how fortunate I am. I mean, that often is a sentiment of being in places where you have that kind of experience. Thank God that ain't me. I mean, kind of.
Yeah, you become more grateful of the things you have, and then the things that you worry about become so trivial to you. So you look at the macro picture.
So it can have that positive effect that it can help you be more grateful for your life, and yes, sir.
Developing compassion.
Developing compassion. I think you all are going beyond where I see tourism usually, but it certainly can be. It can, if it's done in the right way, it could be. It could be a developing compassion. It certainly could be. Certainly could be. All right, and for what am I doing here? Impact of the tourism. Oh, for a mission trip, you're on the receiving end of a mission delegation. What's the impact on your community? Same.
Sometimes you get your teeth fixed in medical care.
Sometimes you've done a medical tourist kind of experience, yes. So you inject a little money into the local economy, yes.
My youngest son asked me before we went to the one mission trip that we did right into the beach. He said, "Mom, are we rich?" And I think he was still in elementary school. And I said, "Well, why don't you hold that question until we come back?" So he got to see the pickers in what's that area called? Chincoteague area? I don't even know what they call it, but we did the mission trip there. And I said on the way back, I said, "So Kelvin, what do you think? Are we rich?" Yes.
He said yes.
He got it.
Yes. If you have the encounter, and we're over into the third category now, but if you have the encounter in a certain way, it helps you see your place in the global pecking order, or the national pecking order, whatever it may be. We need to move on. I do want to show you some pictures. So, we do this. We take people places. This is going to be more like a video than a slideshow, actually, because I'm going to have to move through it pretty quickly. Do the lights go off in this place?
Yes.
We like it dark. You know how we fit. I want to move this so you guys can see over here. All right. Okay. Am I going to be in anybody's way? Are you okay? Are you okay? All right, fine. All right, so where's my... All right, there we go. So we're not going to talk about this right now so much, our work in the United States, but there's we do this experiential learning here in the U.S. This is one of our sustainable living centers in Virginia. I'll tell you more about that this afternoon. I already told you I do a lot of speaking. On Wednesday, I'm going to be with the same class in Wheatland Elementary School in Wichita, Kansas. That's where I'm going to be on Wednesday. So I do a lot of this, which I've already told you about. But we're going to go to Guatemala. I picked out some pictures from my first trip. I picked out some pictures from that 1986 trip to show you. Just to show you the thing that changed my life. And so here's a young woman in Guatemala, beautiful lake. You know, there's beauty everywhere. There's not just tragedy and hunger and all these other things. There's beauty everywhere. And there's a quetzal. As you know, probably, the national bird of Guatemala. I never thought we'd see one. We saw one in a national park. It's also the name of their currency, the quetzal. And just the people. We stayed in homes, to meet people, and it was really service, kind of a service experience in that sense. We saw the historical sites, and you need to see these places. It's their richness, their tradition, Tikal. And then there's the beauty. There is the beauty of these places, but you don't have to look far to scratch the surface a little bit, which you do in your work and we try to do in ours, to see the harsher realities. I took this picture. I realized on this trip the power of photography. This was the trip that woke me up. I grew up in a family of sliders. You know slides? My mother was the photographer of the family. I had the family camera with me on this trip, even though I was in my 30s at this time. I had the Fujika something that was fully manual, which I still wish I had it, frankly. Anyway, but this girl is already a child worker. I didn't know what I was seeing. And one of the things that when we go to these places, we don't know what we're seeing. We don't know what we're seeing. But this is a child worker. And there's a boy over there with a swollen stomach. That's malnutrition. Again, you're seeing this stuff and you're seeing it for the first time, but you don't really know what you're seeing. But you learn about it later. And there's a child with an eye infection. I asked the parent, will this child see a doctor? And the response was, not in her lifetime. And this is the case for people all around the world. We talked about healthcare a while ago. This is the case for people all around the world. And then here's a family, speaking of not having the capital. An aid agency gave them these pigs. To have piglets, to sell, to get income, to get more pigs. Well, they didn't have enough corn for both the children and the pigs. And so they had to give up the pigs. So you can't get up that first rung of the ladder. That's a big, big problem around the world. And here's one of my favorite, in a weird kind of way, pictures from that trip. This is a guy who actually worked with the agency that was hosting the trip was called Hunger and Justice in Central America. A week in Honduras, a week in Guatemala. And this is the guy who worked with the agency that sponsored the trip. And I found it in I often wonder, if I hadn't opened up their mailing the month before and saw the little blurb about that trip, what would have happened to my life? I mean, I don't really know. But there it was. I called. They were full, but they took me. And there we went. Anyway, this is one of their staff. And there was a little dairy project that this organization was supporting there. The women from the community started bringing out cups of warm milk. And you can see his response. No, don't you need it more than me? That's the other part of this equation. I'm not sure we've talked about, maybe we have talked about this, but to be a receiver as well as a giver. We like to be the givers because that's the position of power, if you think about it. And that's the feel-good position. It's like Peter not wanting Jesus to wash his feet. Well, we don't want to be in the recipient position. We want to be in the giver position. But you know how it makes us feel good to give? It makes them feel good as well. And so we have this discussion on our trips. I have the 13 R's. The things we need to pay attention to. We're going to another culture, and that's one of them. Be willing to receive things that are given to you in a spirit of hospitality. Now, there's limits to everything, of course, and you got to be careful what you're eating sometimes in some places. But if you're with a hosting group, they're taking care of you. We're in a lot of trouble, but they're taking care of us to try to keep us from getting sick. And then the deforestation, the land issues and throughout the region back in the 80s. And of course, land is a huge issue all around the world now. There's where the local people farm. And then, that's me when I had hair. But that's Archbishop Juan Harari of the Catholic Church. He had just come back from exile himself in 1986 because he'd been standing up for the poor and railing against the military and political powers that were pushing them down. And his own life had been threatened. So we met him there at the cathedral in White His little office. Well, then, 10 years later, 1996, the war was over. And Harari, and maybe you all know this story, but Harari and the Catholic Church recuperated, it's called the Recuperation of Memory Project. They got people to tell their stories. And they wrote them all in these big volumes, the Remy Project it's called, and where they told what happened to them. The army came to our village, they locked the women and children in a hut and set it afire. I mean, that's the kinds of things you were hearing. Anyway, so they collected all these stories when the war was over as their collective healing. Well, they had a ceremony in the cathedral in Guatemala City. I was invited back because I was an international visitor who'd been there before and had some other connections. Anyway, I was invited, one of the million, the thousands of people in the cathedral that evening. And there was thunderous applause when he stood up to present these stories back to the people because they knew he had risked his life for them. Well, later that night, there was a reception in the little anteroom, where the international people, and he was there. I should have gone up and, got a selfie. Well, we didn't do selfies back then. But anyway, I should have said something, hey, remember me from 10 years ago. I didn't. I got on the plane the next morning, went back to Chicagoland where I was living, opened up the paper the next day, Sunday morning. He'd been bludgeoned to death in his garage because he had stood up for the people. And then the report revealed the atrocities mostly committed by the military, and a lot of them were still in power. So you speak up for the poor in this world at your own risk, and we can all name names of people that we know and honor who stood up for the poor and paid a price of one kind or another in this world. Anyway, there's that story. So bye-bye Guatemala. Actually, going to El Salvador very briefly. This actually was from my first trip to Central America. I met Salvadorans for the first time in Honduras at the Mesa Grande refugee camp. Maybe some of you have been there back in the day, but the Mesa Grande refugee camp just across the border into Honduras. Then we started taking groups to El Salvador ourselves a couple of years ago, so I'm getting beyond those original pictures I was showing. There's our delegation from a couple of years ago, going up to this community to help build some houses. We don't focus on our learning tours on doing anything. Because, it can distract you from the real purpose of being there, which is asking the question that your son asked you, are we the rich ones here? And why are we coming here and they're not coming to help us? I mean, it distracts you from those deeper questions. You can go home, I think, feeling too good about yourself. You built a latrine, you saved the world. You probably didn't. You know what I'm saying? Anyhow, but they asked us to come and do this, and we don't do enough work in the United States, frankly, physical labor. So if that's the motive, if that's their method of doing things, that's fine. So we're helping build some of these replacement homes for those shampas. They call those other homes the shampas, the ones I just showed you. And of course, they can work circles around us, but they tolerate us because we came with funds. I mean, that's another part of this equation. You come with funds. And if we don't send our mission trip there, the funds aren't probably going to come either. I mean, this is the news. This is the truth of the matter. Anyhow, so I tell our delegations to get plenty of rest and to do some journaling. There's Hannah from Kansas. She's a multitasker. But our real purpose, this is a coffee growing region of El Salvador. So the real purpose was to learn about coffee because I know we all got a connection to coffee. So I asked if somebody could give us a tour of the coffee plantation. And our guide, Josue, lined us up with Fatima, a single 30-something-year-old illiterate mother of 4. And she agreed to, on a Sunday afternoon, to meet us, to take us on a little trip through the coffee fields, where from November to February, the coffee ripening season, she does her work. She said she finds her appointed place on the hillside, hopes to pick 100 pounds of coffee, for which she is paid $3 to $5. Now, I did the math on, you have to dry it and roast it. You get about 70 pounds of coffee, maybe, from 100 pounds of green beans. Well, they're red, but you know what I'm saying, green beans. And Starbucks, they make 75 cents per cup profit. Starbucks can get 60 cups out of a pound of coffee. So 60 times 70 is 4,200. 4,200 times 75 cents. They're going to make about $3,000 profit on what she was paid $3 to $5 on the bottom end of that situation to pick. And then perhaps the most poignant moment of the morning, she showed us when she's got that 100-pound bag down the hill, she has to get it back up to the road to take it down to the hacienda to get her pay. She straps it around her forehead, bag on her back, climbs up the hill on all fours. She's pantomiming here. And then she don't weigh 100 pounds herself, but she's tough as nails. She's doing what she has got to do. And she shows us in the off-season, she's pantomiming having a machete. I don't know if any of you have ever swung a machete for any length of time. It's not that much fun. She said she gets paid $40 for 15 days' work. She said it rubs my hands raw. Then she said she sneaks up at night and steals the leaf mulch to sell to the nurseries, the plant nurseries downtown. She says the owner doesn't want me doing this. But if I'm not earning some money or if I'm sick, my children survive on tortillas and salt. Then, at the end of the day, I asked her, you try to ask open-ended questions in these kind of situations, which you all know how to do this. But you don't want to put words in their mouth, because you're the power person. They may say what they think you want to hear. So I said, Fatima, how is this for you? Working here in the coffee fields, for yourself, your family, how's it working for you? I said, is it enough? She said, no. She said, I can barely feed my children. And she got that look of grim resignation I've seen on the faces of women around the world. She said, I can barely feed my children and keep them in school. But what choice do I have? There's a huge differentiator between me and you and them. Options. So part of our goal in the New Community Project is to give women and girls around this world options, that they're not stuck, what I call the economics of desperation. That's my term for this. But you're doing a job that doesn't have real possibilities or dignity or adequate pay, but it's what you've got to do to make a living for yourself and your family. Her daughter Brenda, Fatima told me, Brenda, this is our second, we went to this community a couple of times. On the second trip, you know someone well enough they can say things they might not have the first time. That's the value of the depth. And carrying on the relationship, as you said. Anyway, she told me that her daughter Brenda was thinking about dropping out of school to help with the other children. I'm thinking, please, Brenda. These girls drop out of school, they're married and pregnant before you know it, or they're off working in the sweatshops, the maquilas in San Salvador, where we met some with former maquila workers. They said the harassment begins when you're hired. They line all the 16, 17-year-old, 18-year-old girls up outside, and they hire the pretty ones. That's the job qualifications. And then that harassment continues once you're inside. And they said when we get fired, when we're 30 or 30 couple years old, because they're worried we're going to get pregnant, or we're starting to organize, they said we go out in the street, we have to sell tortillas. We never learned to be a seamstress. We could do the collar. We could do the sleeve. Nobody taught us to be a seamstress. So we give them we're trying to, microloans is one of the things we support, and you all probably do that too. We have a part of our Give a Girl a Chance program is helping women with microloans to start small businesses, including starting some plant nurseries. And now this picture. The next morning, Monday morning, at our gathering time, Josue, our guide, we're having a little kind of meet and greet, and how's your day, and what we're going to do. He said, I was so proud of you yesterday. I said, yeah? What did we do? He said, well, no other group, and there have been other groups cycling through to do this construction. He said, no other group has ever asked to meet with the community. Oh, I didn't tell you the story. Wait, no, back up. So on Sunday afternoon, after we met with Fatima, we wanted to ask for a meeting with the community to just learn from them, to talk about our common struggles, whatever. And there were about 50 people showed up, most of them were women. So we started talking. So then, back to my story, the next morning, he says, I was so proud of you yesterday. And then I said, why? He says, well, no other group that's ever come here has ever asked to meet with the community. Now I'm thinking, why did these people come here? But anyway, they never asked to meet with the community. And he said, especially the women. They said, no one has ever asked for our ideas. All right, this is going to be a quick trip to Alaska. Well, we do environmental exposure trips too, getting us up on the ground with things that are happening in this world. There's Denali. Maybe you've been to Denali National Park. A lot of you probably have. Anyway, there's our campsite at Savage River Campground, 15 miles in. A couple of years ago, we're going back. We haven't even set up camp yet. The driver of the bus spots a mother grizzly and two cubs beside the road. He stops. We're taking pictures. She charges the bus. It's a bluff charge. You know how these things work. If you're out in the wild, you're supposed to stand there and look big. If the 450-pound mother grizzly is coming at you 35 miles an hour and she's upset, you're supposed to look big. Because if you run, you're prey, and then you better pray. Anyway, like I'm going to do that. But anyway, we're on the bus. So we get to experience a bluff charge. She comes up running up to the bus, skids to a stop on the pavement. Just like that. Well, we all wet our pants. But other than that, it was a great experience. Plus, we had an emergency exit. We had this encounter the next day. Well, I'm sitting as close as me to you, the moose, and so I better get some good pictures out of this. That's all I'm saying. But also, her calf is back in the grass because the mother moose don't bluff charge. She don't mess around. You got to get behind a tree or something. Anyway, but she's back there. So while we're taking, when we first started taking groups to Denali, and we've been going up to visit the Gwich'in people, way up north, 150 miles north of the Arctic Circle, all the oil drilling issues, the culture, all this stuff. Well, on a lark almost, one of those years, I combined that trip, and people could also go with us to Denali, or they could come separately to one or the other. I thought this will just be a one-off, But, it's not, what are the issues here? There's no human rights stuff going on, women's suppression, all that stuff. And then, but after I saw the impact it had on people to be up close and personal with nature in that way, especially big things, and to be with each other for a week or 10 days in the campground eating my cooking, it's going to bring people together, I'm just telling you. So we continue to take groups to Denali. We climb this mountain every year. We often see doll sheep there, squaring off in Mortal Kombat. We also, for the first time this year, saw thawing permafrost. The permafrost is going fast all across the northern hemisphere. My Gwich'in friends say you used to have to only go down 6 inches to find the permafrost. Now you've got to go down 3 feet. And as permafrost thaws, it releases methane, CO2, other greenhouse gases that are going to make climate change worse. Alaska's melting and burning. That's how I say Alaska. Also, we always meet a big bull caribou. I think they're up there to escape the predators, from the bears and the wolves to the mosquitoes and bugs that get up their nose and stuff. There's wind up there. They go to higher ground. We always see a bull caribou on top of the mountain. But it's grazing. It's eating the lichen on the ground. That's its food right now. And even they eat that in the wintertime, even when there's snow on the ground. But they use that front part of their antler to dig down through the snow. Well, the ranger told us this time that now you've got the freeze-thaw cycle going on in Alaska all through the winter. It's not staying below freezing all year round, and it creates a crust on the snow. More difficult for the caribou to get their food. So I'm just trying to show people the ramifications of our behavior in terms of carbon in this case. There are glaciers are melting around the world, as you know. There, above those people in the white, you can see a little patch of white. 1926, it was right here. This is Exit Glacier down in Seward. Maybe you are familiar with it. There's where it was in 2016. 2019, 2021. So this is showing people the facts on the ground about what's going on with climate change. And we had a woman come home from this trip, Christine from where's she from? Colorado. Christine from Colorado teaches school in a rural area of Colorado. She got back home. The first thing she posted on Facebook was a picture of her clothesline in her backyard. She said, I'm giving up my dryer. Anything I can do to save energy and help deal with climate change, I'm going to do it. It actually feels good to put up that clothesline. And now she's a teacher. She can also educate those kids from rural Colorado, where they're not necessarily eco-friendly, about what's going on in places like Alaska and how our life is connected to that world that's happening up there. There's the Gwich'in. We go visit the Gwich'in. I'm not going to show you many pictures or any pictures other than this one, but they're caribou people. They're traditional, dressed up in traditional. They don't usually wear stuff like that on the left, top left, but on special occasion. And that's Sarah James, a Gwich'in spokesperson. She said, you know, that's where we want to go and drill for the oil up on the coastal plain of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. That's where the caribou migrate to give birth. She said, we're caribou people. We live off the caribou. But we won't go up on the coastal plain to hunt, even if we're starving. We consider it the sacred place where life began. You'll go up there for 6 months worth of oil. That's how she says it. So we're there to learn from the native communities there, as well as the Ecuador, as well as out in New Mexico, this different way of looking at the land. Let's see how much time. 4 minutes. Let's see what we can do. All right, so we're gonna we may only get to one more place, but there's Everest talking about high mountains. So we're in Nepal. We go there on our learning tours. We have a great experience in a wildlife park there, where they're doing a great job conserving large mammals. I could tell you that whole story some other time, but it's really impressive. And rhinos, elephants, Bengal tigers, they're all there. It's really quite a thing. There's a samba. Oh, I do have this one other picture. There's a samba deer with the big ears, listening out for a certain predator, and that's as close as we've gotten to a Bengal tiger. I did get a picture off the web for you. This is how you want to meet it, on the road at a distance. Yeah. All right, so a lot of poverty. 40% of the children, as we talked about earlier, are malnourished. Child workers. 1.5 million child workers in Nepal out of a total under 15 population of 15 million. So 10% of the kids there are child workers. And the woman in the background, she's a recruiter. She goes out and promises the parents a little something, sends them something every month, takes the child away for training, working from dawn till dusk, not going to school, getting room and board, not getting paid. This is a child worker. I wouldn't have known this if we weren't with our partners. I wouldn't have had a clue as to who this was and what the situation was unless we were with our partner group and they could tell us these things. Women, they got it hard all over the world. These women are acting like pack mules, carrying this wood down the hill. My friend Sarah wanted to give it a try. Again, experiential learning. She couldn't get off the ground. My buddy Walt gave her a hand. She could not get off the ground. There go the women down the hill. They weren't born to carry, but they've learned to carry. And then every 20 seconds around the world, a woman or a child dies from breathing indoor cook smoke. So we're just trying to expose people. As these women and children are exposed to that smoke, we want to expose people to the realities in places like this. Pooja and her mother carrying these brick up the hill all day long. Between them, they earn 75 cents. You might say she's one of the lucky ones. 10 to 12,000 girls get trafficked into the sex trade out of Nepal every year. We meet them. We work with a group called Shakti Samuha, who had been formerly trafficked themselves. When they came home from being abroad in India, got rescued, nobody knew what to do with them, so they've set up an organization to deal with these women who've come back. They're tricked into going by an auntie who says there's a good job for you down there, or a man pretends to love them and marries them, takes them to India on the honeymoon and leaves them in a brothel. They take these girls as young as 8. And if they're not maturing quickly enough, they inject them with a growth hormone, like we would a cow. I'm just telling you how this works. So there's our delegation from January before last, the women from Shakti on the far right. We have some young people, we have some old people. That's how our groups shake out. And Shakti Samuha, the word means power group. So these women who'd been trafficked, came back, started this organization. They said, we turned our tears into power. These are the people you want to find to work with. As you know, in your work in Haiti, these are the kind of people you want to find to work with. And there's our delegation from a couple of years ago. There's some trafficked girls in the foreground. I can't show you faces for security and privacy. So they get them in these shelters where they recuperate them, get them back in school, teach them skills, give them friends, and then we keep girls in school. That's our way of keeping them out of that stream. Because the more education a girl has, the more valuable the family sees her being. And she might make more money for us here than she would if she goes to someplace like India or the Middle East. That's Regina, Kabuti, and Mooney. They're middle schoolers. We give them $30 a year or something for their scholarship. So they're sitting, we're talking to them. Regina on the left starts telling us about her life, her school, her choices, her favorite subjects. Then at one point she said, I haven't seen my mother in a year and a half. Well, she'd had to go abroad to work. And as she's telling us that, she just buries her faith in her scarf and just starts to cry. That's really why we're doing this. I mean, A, taking people there to experience this reality and get us on board with finding ways to support these young women and what they're doing. And B, to help these young women and their mothers stay out of that predicament, to give them other options. That's my main line here, I'm saying. Give them other options. And then it gives us other options when we came home. Oh, gosh, I'll just tell you, this is going to be my last story. We're finishing right here. So I'm speaking at a middle school in Wakarusa, Indiana. I'm telling you the story partly just to say that word. But I'm teaching, doing a class, assembly, like a room bigger than this, full of kids, 6th graders, in Wakarusa, Indiana. And I'm talking about the environment that day, but also talking about young women and people around the world. And I tell the story of young women in Nepal. And this was after the earthquake, was it 2008-ish or something like that? And of course, that made things even worse, because then you're more economically vulnerable, and you're more likely to send your daughter off into the sex trade. So we had a campaign we called But Not Forgotten. We're raising money after the earthquake, but we were going to send it 6 or 8 months later when all the other aid agencies had gone home to the next crisis. You know what I'm saying? This is how it works often. So we're going to give it to our partners there to support girls' education. I help the mothers have jobs so they can keep their daughters in school, all this stuff. So I'm telling these kids in this classroom in early fall of whatever year that was about this and going on to other things. Well, 2 of the girls, Regina and Samantha, I should have had a picture. See, I wasn't thinking about telling you the story. I have a picture of them. Maybe I'll show you this afternoon. Regina and these are Amish girls. Now, not the whole school's not Amish, but a segment of them are. Regina and Samantha, 2 Amish girls, that put a bee under their bonnet. I don't know if that's an appropriate phrase to use, but they got excited about doing something about this. They started a campaign in their middle school to raise money to send over to these young women. We were trying to raise, I don't know, $27,000 or something. They started a campaign, and they organized a raffle that you pay $1, you get a coupon, a ticket, then you win the cool prize. If you're drawn, you win the cool prize that some company in town donated. I don't know what kids think are cool these days, but whatever it was cool. And so they raised $700 and some. These 2 Amish girls. And then when we got that, it literally put us over the top of our campaign. And I told them that. Well, in the spring, I was back for a second assembly in the same place. And there the whole crowd was in the gymnasium. Samantha and Regina were there. I called them up at the end. Gave them one of our recycled ink pens, which some of you got from your treat bag over here. And I said, every cause needs a champion. And these girls were the champion of this cause. Of course, everybody clapped and all that stuff. After it was over, they came back up to me and said, do you have another project for us? These are the blessings of making these connections. Thank you for what you're doing. We'll talk more today. I don't know about for you, but this is typically my nap time of the day, so I'll try not to fall asleep, and don't you either if I don't, all right? So we'll see how this goes. Well, let me first just ask if there's any further questions or comments from this morning. I don't need to get any longer discussion about any of this, but we had it kind of end abruptly because it was lunchtime. So I don't know if there's any just last minute comment or question related to this morning, which I'd be happy to respond to, or maybe no response is needed, but.
So have you ever heard of Dining for Women? That's been renamed Together Women Rise here in the Carolinas, and also microloans that are being given to women. So how is your organization different from some of these other organizations that say furnish?
I'll repeat that. I'll repeat for her.
Yeah, that
So she's asking about some of the difference between our organization maybe and other groups that are working with women specifically.
Yeah.
And you named a couple in North
Yeah,
Carolina.
Together Women Rise focus on international
Okay, terrific.
women and children,
Terrific.
girls
Yeah.
project.
Well, of course, I think we're the best, but every group thinks that, and I'm glad they do. I mean, everybody should feel good about their work. As we've had some conversations around the corners here today, very important to know who you're working with, both locally, I mean, who your allies are here in the States, but also especially overseas. It's very hard, easy for money to get subverted in various ways, as we all know. So we work only with grassroots groups in these other places, often women-led, depending on the kind of work we're doing, some reforestation, girl stuff, women's group stuff, but typically it's through women's groups that we're working with there. And so we do visit them. On our overseas partnerships out of the Americas, we often are there every other year. And so we're visiting there. It's not to check up on anybody, but you're with a group in a village in Myanmar, and if things aren't going the way the women think they should be going, they will tell you. And then you can talk to your partner about it, who's overseeing those programs. So, and another, I guess, characteristic for us is, or maybe distinguishing mark, is that we don't keep any of this money for ourselves. A lot of groups, this is their work, and I understand they've got to pay their staff and all those other things. People pay for our salaries and travel and these kinds of things through our core budget. I mean, they give us money to do this broader work, and then any money that comes in directly for the women, the girls, the reforestation, 100% goes over. Actually, sometimes more than 100%, because we fairly regularly get matching grants from people who want to see these things multiplied, and so I can often match stuff. So you're getting more than you sent in often. So those maybe are two of the things that says, well, every group hopefully works through local partners. There's no other way to do it. I can't think of any other way to do it that's responsible and respectful and efficient. Put any other word in there. I don't even know what those words are. Adjectives, adverbs, I don't know what they are. But put another one in there, and that's the best way to do it. So working through local partners, and then ours not taking the overhead for ourselves. And pretty much letting the partners set the agenda. I mean, we have a framework of things that we support. The girls' education, the women's empowerment, and reforestation. But it's up to them. Just recently, I got a request to restore hippo habitat along Lake Tanganyika in Congo because it's all been eroded from human traffic and also flooding. And so the hippos got no place to hang out at night, so they wander in and are tromping around on people's farmland. And also, you don't want to mess with hippos, just in general. And plus, it's also fish habitat, so people are eating fish from that lake, which have a place to reproduce, because they're coastal area estuaries. That's not the right word, probably. Coastal area hatcheries. That's the word I'm looking for. Aren't there anymore? So they ask for $5,000 to put in some acres of hippo habitat, because it's related to people's farming. It's related to fish production. So, but I wouldn't have any clue about that. And that's actually kind of a special project this fall with some others, things that we don't typically fund because we don't have it within our umbrella, under our umbrella, but people that our friends need. And so we try to find a way to respond, even if it's not typically part of what we do. We think it's so important to listen to local people. I'll give you just one more example of that. In terms of girls' education, we're supporting these girls in South Sudan. And by the way, which I don't think we're going to get to today, but in South Sudan, they say a 15-year-old girl more likely to die in pregnancy and childbirth than to graduate from high school. Them are the odds. And so keeping these young women in school is critical. So we're keeping girls in school through kind of like our 10th grade, sort of, in their school system. But then girls, over a couple of different trips there, over the span of 2 years, these older girls would come to me and to our delegation and say, thank you very much for this. What we really need now is to go to Uganda, next door country, for 2 more years of education. If we really want to jumpstart our careers and get more technical training, more specialized training, well, that's going to be $750 per girl per year. I can keep 20 little girls in school for that. We really didn't have money for that. But, who are we as an organization not to listen to these young women?
They could be the leaders.
So on the way home on that flight, I got the idea for what we call Second Step program, helping these girls take the next step, and then people individually fund this. I don't really do sponsorships. We don't really do sponsorships, but people can give to a girl, and then she gets to take that next step. So you got to find a way by hook or crook to respond to the felt needs of your neighbors. And the hippo thing is one case in point, and these young women. And I admire these young women for speaking up. Because here you've got the rich world donor coming in. you probably are thinking twice about ruffling feathers in this situation. You're seeming ungrateful, you might say. But I just really respect the fact that they felt comfortable to be able to speak up in that situation to me and to our group and say, how about this? Yes.
I just wanted to make a comment that, is it on? I was living in south of Russia in the country of Georgia, and the girls there, they would stop going to school as soon as they got their period because there was no water to wash their hands, or, and the latrines were, a hole in the ground at that.
I hear you.
And
And sometimes not reserved for girls. They can be a multi-person thing, and girls don't want to be there. So go ahead.
right, so the girls would stop coming to school and they would never, get past the, ninth grade. So just, we haven't talked too much about water, but, water is just such an important project. I keep thinking that some things like supporting the girls and women is really important for organizations like all of ours. But I think things like water, there's a lot of international NGOs that support water, but I think we should also try to push political capital to have the governments responsible for that. So that's I've been kind of changing my way of thinking.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm supporting more of what you're saying, the young girls and, making sure that they can go to school, because that's something the government's never going to do.
Thank you for that. And just to respond to a couple of those, you mentioned the hygienic materials for girls. We give probably as much or more to East Africa for girls' education, as much or more to sanitary products as we do to scholarships. In fact, we give girls through any of these communities where we're supporting some girls in school, any of the girls in that school, even if they're not getting our scholarships, they need the sanitary materials too. And so we provide that far and wide to these young women because they start missing a few days a month, they get behind, they drop out, and before you know it, they're pregnant, married and pregnant. And so that's a huge, of course, again, as a male, I might not have been super sensitive to that issue, to know that that would ever be a problem in a situation like that. Again, our partner said, by the way, along with the scholarships we need. Now I've got a partner in Malawi who's going to be training girls to make sanitary products. Because it's a bottomless pit, really, if you're thinking about buying disposables. And so they're actually going to be training 30 girls. That's part of our fall campaign. One of the things we don't really have in our budget, but here's what our partner said they needed. Our fall campaign, you're going to be having a workshop for 30 girls, 30 kind of emerging leaders, to train them to make the sanitary products, to train them to train others to do it, and also to train them as role models in leadership, to show them robust models of young women who have the capability to stand in front of a group and to lead a campaign of some kind or another or whatever. So, yeah. And again, the woman who was sitting over here a while ago talked about listening. That's so critical to what any of us do in this world, in these departments. And you mentioned water. I mean, I can't tell you how many communities I've been to in the world that don't have soap. I mean, even if you got water to wash your hands, we were in Myanmar. I wish I'd have put this picture in. I don't think I did. Who knows if I did? I don't think I did. Anyway, in Myanmar, up in the hill areas, and we stay in we stay in homes in the hill areas, but in modest motels down in the cities. They don't give you soap and shampoo in the hotels we stay in. But my trekking friend guide, who's also a reforestation guy, he also hosts groups that do stay in those kind of motels. Well, they bring him the soap and shampoo, and he gives it to the people in the communities. So he's distributing this to some of the women in the community. They're all kind of not lined up, but encircling him, waiting for their soap and their shampoo. I said, Jimmy, why don't they have soap? He said, they'd rather have food. So that's the choice people are having to make around the world. And once again, how do we give people options? They don't have to make these bad choices. Water, particularly, as you mentioned, lots of people working at that. Government should be working at that. You got to pick your battles as an organization. We actually have a well. Now I'm going to make a liar out of myself. Because in Congo, we have a person asked for a well for pygmy, for Batwa people. It's in our campaign this fall. I mean, that's not our thing. But when our friends say these women are walking 2 or 3 miles and getting water out of the river, and the life expectancy in some of these Batwa communities is 28 years, and water quality is a big part of that. Cholera, typhoid, just whatever. I feel like I'm not thinking of one, but anyway, yes. So, but we don't specialize in water. But again, if our friends said, hey, this is what this community really needs, and they're the ones that work with them, they know and they'll be monitoring it, because a lot of wells, as I was mentioning to someone a while ago, half the wells in Africa that have been built by donor organizations don't work anymore. Because the community wasn't involved, they didn't have say in how placement, maybe training for how to deal with it, how to manage it, no investment in digging it, and so then once it breaks, well, that was nice for a while. So it sounds a little depressing, but the bright side, if you do it in the right way, good things can happen. That's the other side of this. And you wonder, all of you deal with the world. It's hard not to be depressed, especially if you look at the macro level. What's going on in Glasgow this week? It's hard to be that optimistic about that. But if you look on the micro level, as you know, and others of you who work in communities around the world in some way or another, or in your interchange in your home with your service exchange person, looking on the micro level, there's cause for hope. And so how do we work? We see it working from the ground up, whether internationally or here in the United States, working from the ground up and figuring out and thinking that maybe that then will save the day, will win the day. Because from top down, it's hard to see how those real deep changes are going to happen that we need.